And Glenn, it's good to see you. Part
Good to
three.
see you, Jason.
Yes. We were saying this is the final of the series, and on one hand, it would be good if it was. That means that Google Analytics has stopped messing with things. But on the other hand, that would be kind of a bummer because then we won't be able to have these talks anymore. So
Got a good point.
yeah. So let's get started here with the slide. So who are we? I'm sure we have some new registrants here. Myself, I head up partnerships here at Arctic Leaf. A little bit about myself. I've been in e-commerce for a little bit over a decade. I've held a few different roles, director roles, digital marketing, mainly in apparel. I've worked for bigger companies like Versace, but then very, very small boutique companies based here in Los Angeles. Needless to say, GA has always been a big component to what I do, and also the bane to my existence for what I do because it can be very frustrating. With me is I'm very honored to be with Glenn Schmelzle again. It's always insightful speaking with you. Glenn, you have so much of history working with Google Analytics and such a big background. If I actually said exactly what you did, it'll take up this entire webinar, but mainly you are a marketing consultant, and I would love for you to give everyone an intro because go for it.
Yeah, sure. So thank you, Jason. And yeah, history, the history book was a 5-page pamphlet when I was younger. But the truth is that I have been around analytics for quite some time. To date myself, I used to use, well, my first job out of school was analyzing some marketing data, and the tool that I was handed to do it with was this thing called Lotus 123 spreadsheet, for those of you who never heard of it. And I also, in time, came to find this nifty tool that measured websites, and it was called Urchin, and the company was the same name. And I just stuck with them. It ended up being acquired and renamed into what is now Google Analytics. And I've been certified on each version of Google Analytics. And now the type of analysis that is done using it is not only with the tool, but with even bigger tools like data warehouses. And so that's the state of things now. And I'm so happy, having gone through that, series of steps up until the present, that I can share with people some of the things that might just ease the tension around GA4.
Mm-hmm.
Jason.
Very nice, very nice. Awesome. So let's kind of get started to the next slide here. Kind of like what I said, this is the third part of this series, and the last two parts were, the first one was a big deal because that was everybody having to adopt GA4, kind of the fear mongering around that, what that was going to entail. There was a lot of unknowables. The second was more so along the lines of, okay, what are you seeing now? What are some headaches that you're seeing now? This one is much of kind of emphasizing some of the points that we made the last few webinars that we had. And this really has come from, at least from my perspective, speaking with my clients the past 6 months, finding out that a lot of the same issues we talked about are still issues in and of themselves. So what we're going to kind of talk about here, the timeline, which has kind of changed, but hasn't really changed, terminology that is still kind of frustrating for some merchants and also some digital marketers, and of course events, shifting to an event mindset because GA4 is purely event based, and then also metrics. A lot of my clients are telling me that their metrics are missing when they go in. So why are they missing, or are they actually missing, and kind of what that really means. And then of course we'll kind of teeter between e-commerce and lead generation. So that's kind of what you guys can expect for this. So next slide. So the timeline, the big one last time around was the fact of you having to adopt GA4 before your data stopped propagating, which was July, this past July. So that did happen. There are some instances where there is still data propagating, but very small bits of it. I really hope anyone listening is not using UA anymore, that they have adopted GA4 and are using GA4 to look at their performance. With that being said, at the beginning of next year, January, the UA, you will no longer be able to access that. So that's the big component, and that's going to kind of lead us to talk about exporting your data. because though you can still access it now and you can still use that to comp your data, there's going to come a point in January where you can no longer do that. And then with 360, 360, Glenn, you kind of work with 360 a little bit more than I do. What are some of the dates that are occurring with 360 users?
Happy to do that. I'll first just amend what you said. For the vast majority of people, they do have until the end of the first half of 2024. So they have until June 30th to get it all done. On July 1st, the free version goes away. But for those who are on a paid version of Google Analytics, and I don't imagine there are many listening, those people have been given longer by Google to do it. They actually can hold on to the data and access it even up to the very end of last year. But you can tell that everything is getting wound down. So there's nothing new happening in Universal Analytics. It's just you need to go in and download what's there before your access to it is removed.
Mm-hmm.
We'll talk at the end of the webinar. I've got, I was fed some of the early questions that came in, and one of them is about how to download it. So I'll touch on it then.
Perfect. And we've had to deal with so many date changes. I'm still confused myself at times of all the
It is
changes.
confusing.
But I think it's also safe to say that we probably shouldn't want to assume that any of these dates are going to change down the line because they have changed so much. We like to assume, well, please don't do that to us.
Yeah, the sooner the better. You need to download.
Yep. 100%. Perfect. Okay, next slide here. So terminology, again, we touched upon this in the last time we met. The biggest one here, particularly when I'm talking to clients that are still primarily in UA or still used to UA, is when they want to benchmark their data and then they want to set goals for them. Of course, you can still do that in GA4, but the big thing here, it's called something different because it's event-based. What you really mean to say is that you want to create an event and then you want to toggle that event to be a conversion. That's basically your new version of goals. That's the biggest one. It's a little hard to wrap your head around because it's slightly thinking of it differently. But when I'm speaking to my clients, I'm trying to let them know, like, yes, we can still do that thing, but it's just going to be called this thing. Some of the minor ones, page views are now views, sessions are now session starts. We already kind of spoke upon this. Engagement rate. This is essentially the inverse to bounce rate. Now, Google has since added bounce rate as a metric you can add to your reports, which is good. I think that's good to get users still acclimated to the new verbiage. I'm still pushing towards using engagement rate as the verbiage. And the reason why is because I like the positive connotation around it. It's obviously showing the users that are on your page as opposed to users that are bouncing off your page. Kind of along the lines, if I do a quarterly business review with a client, I don't like to say pain point. I like to say focus point. We already kind of harp on Google and GA. I like the idea of looking at data in a positive light. So that's why I kind of like engagement rate. And of course, average engagement time. We talked about this a little bit with GA4 is able to measure time. That's a big deal. That's a lot different from how UA measured it. So we can talk a little bit more about that. But audience I know the audience refresh is pretty invasive. And Glenn, you kind of touch upon that a little bit more in your line of work, right?
Yes. So it begins from what we've said right here. The new version uses events. Everything is an event. And, you know, when people ask me, well, what really does that mean? It really does mean everything. Like, you know, if somebody scrolls, that can be an event. If they click on something, that can be an event. All sorts of interactions. So when you think about how your website tips you off to the kind of people that are using it by what actions they take, you can use any of those, even the most minuscule of actions, to help group people that do that thing together. And you got yourself an audience. So now you ask yourself, so if they all acted that way, and that kind of means that they are at this stage or they have these kind of traits, can I use that to tailor messages, maybe remarketing ads or special experiences for the next time that they come? And the answer is yes, you can, but you have to first say what those events are and then define that set of actions as an audience. And once you start creating it from that moment on, Google Analytics starts to look at those people all as one group and adds new people to the group who do that same thing. So it's a good concept. It's the kind of thing that you probably need to try it out a few times to get the hang of it. But once you've got that information pooling, you will be further ahead than your competitors in terms of using it.
Yeah, that's all great. And Glenn, let me ask you, when you're consulting, are you seeing a lot of your clients uh, actively using the audiences, or at least understanding the capabilities of it?
Uh, so they all start with some basic ones like my engaged audience, right? So, have they been on the site for more than half a minute or a minute? Then they start to think about what their customer journey is. And then they start to come up with better audiences. Now, a bit of a, you know, two sides to this coin. The more requirements or criteria that you put on what that audience is, the fewer number of people will meet that, which means you need to allow a longer lead time before that audience is large enough to either see if it's making a difference
Mm.
or to use it in something like remarketing. But if you find that, happy medium between there are these few people that do this thing and they're different from, the great unwashed that are on my site,
Mhm.
and it's good to give them their own tailored message, but I've left it open enough that enough of them go into that group that I can reach the size I need to for my advertising. Those are the ones that I find really strike the balance.
Got it. A lot more use out of kind of bucketing it in that way, kind of casting a wider net.
Yeah, there's a Goldilocks phenomenon, right? The bucket can't be too big or too small. It's got to be just right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good points. Cool. Next slide here. So new events, new tag. With GA4, because again, we keep saying over and over again, it's completely event based. With that comes a few different versions of events. You have the basic events. You know what those are. You add GA4 to your website or your app. You comes with those stock standard events. Of course, you have enhanced measurements as well. And then you have what Google's calling their recommended events, right? They have a list of the recommended events that you can essentially toggle on and off. Those come predefined with the names and parameters. Still very useful. And for, I would imagine, most merchants that just need the data, if they're using it in a very modest way, that will basically work. And then, of course, you have custom events. Because you can do anything, and we said this last time, because you can do anything, it gives you this big slate to create any event. That also comes with a lot of responsibility. So it's always recommended that, yes, you can create custom events, you can create any type of event, but you want to make sure that the recommended events aren't working for you before you go down that path. I've, since adopting GA4, some of my clients, I've created custom events, and I've seen a lot of benefits from creating custom events. But with that also comes creating custom reports, because if you create the event, you need to measure that, and that comes with the custom report aspect, which we will talk a lot more on, because that's a big component, I think, of this webinar. But and again, there's a lot around this. I always recommend, before you go down the custom event approach, reach out to myself if it's one of our clients, but Glenn, anyone that you work with, because you can literally do anything, and sometimes you can break things too. So there's a lot you can do. What's your thoughts around this, Glenn?
Yeah, so those events go hand in hand with the tool that really makes events even possible, and that is a tag. So I'm going to take a second talking about that. And for those of you who have a technical person on staff, uh, this is probably what they're most interested in. So I'll keep it short for the rest of us. The Reader's Digest version is that Google used the opportunity to move all of us over to GA4 to do some housekeeping. And what they did was they used this little snippet that we've had on our websites for a few years now. It's a little piece of JavaScript. They used it to give themselves even wider permissions. And these were in a way that you will appreciate. They used to have need for giving us something to put on our website if we were using Google Ads. And they would need to give us another one if we were using their Google A/B testing tool. And then they gave us another one for Google Analytics. Well, they've combined all those into one now. And what that makes possible is that central tag, it's called the Google tag, not surprisingly, is able to be a traffic cop. And you can kind of, once you've got it there, and you have it now, because if you're looking at GA4, you absolutely have it, but you can tell it to send information to any of the Google products. So that's just a setting. Yes, I want to send it back to Google Ads. They'll let you do that. And anywhere else. But they also have allowed us to build in some new things into it that we can send to those destinations or other ones. So if you have a few pieces of information that have to go every time a button is clicked so that your back-end e-commerce system or the platform that you use for advertising that it needs, this tag allows you to put all those together in one and just say, ditto, send that along too. So there's some good that comes along with it. The thing to keep in mind is it is new and it replaces what is old. So we now have a little bit of housekeeping because we used to have a tag that sent information to Universal Analytics. And so the takeaway for that person on your team that uses Google Tag Manager is to go and pause that. And there may come a time where eventually you'll want to turn off some of those other product specific tags, like the one that used to be used for Google Ads. You just want to make sure that you have those there. You don't want them still active. There could be a risk for somebody using it maliciously. So you do want to kind of make sure that this container that we're given, which is called Google Tag Manager, is kept reasonably clean and just sorting out, all that happened as we made this entire migration.
Mhm. Yeah, it's all good points. And I know for me, speaking to some of my clients, particularly if they're working with a performance marketing agency, and they have for a long time, I look at their container and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is filled to the gills of like
Yes.
everything. I'm like, okay, yes, let's start clean. Let's do an audit. Let's clean up your container. Let's figure this out before we actually take the next approach. I always say, look, it's as an example, I just moved. I was talking to you about this before we jumped on this podcast, which is why I'm
Yeah.
on my couch. Moving is horrible, but the good thing is you're going to a new place, but it gives you an opportunity to purge all your stuff. Get rid of the stuff you no longer need to use, and you can start clean and you can be stress free. So the container that's how it should be looked at. So all good points. Awesome. Next slide here. So reports and analytics. So this metric is missing. I've heard this so many times the last 6 months, and it usually isn't the case. So what I'm finding out, and I think this is no one's fault. This is simply, again, from Google changing some stuff around, making us or asking us at least to adopt new verbiage and adopt new theories and so forth. Some of us are a little bit slower to focus in on this. So as an example, UA, I think there is 30 report stock standard that came with 30 plus maybe, and they're
Yeah.
all there. You didn't have to do anything with it. You can go in there, you can see what your AOV, you can see any type of report that existed in there. GA4 is different. So, and it's not terribly difficult. There's reports and explorations that you can create. There's really good templates within this that can create reports. As an example, I created a few reports for customer retention, cart abandonment flows, and AOV, like just bringing together those reports. It's not terribly difficult, but that's kind of the basis around GA4. You don't get those out of the box. You have to create those reports and tinker with them. And they're not terribly difficult. And I tell everyone, and I hope everyone acknowledges that we are willing to help teach you how to build reports and show you how you can take the report that we build and then hand it off to you and then continually work around that report. That is the essence of GA4. In addition to that, there is the Google Signal aspect. Glenn, I think this you might want to talk about the Google Signals. I have something to say about this too, but I'll hand it off to you.
Sure. So Google Signals is a way for it's a lot like reports. You just described reports as being something that, the data is there, but you've got to go and do some of the building. Google is also asking you if you want to have this Google Signals. And what that's basically doing is asking Google to bring even more information, specifically demographic type information, device type information around the individuals that are coming to your website, and tie that together with the other data that you have. They are giving you that power, and they are not automatically doing it like they used to with Universal, because with places like the EU and the GDPR and US states like California with the CCPA, it's not always a safe assumption if you're Google that holding on to personal data is allowable. So they're putting that onus over onto us. And if you have a privacy policy that makes that allowed, then go ahead and turn Google Signals on. They're going to give you more information on your visitors. The only exception to that is that if you have quite a low traffic site, they don't give you all of that information on aspects of your web traffic that get so low that you would be able to identify the individuals with that information. So they do obscure a little bit of it for very low traffic things, but for the majority of us, they give us extra data when we turn that on.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you what you think of when someone does turn on these reports, because I've told a few of my clients to take those reports with a grain of salt. My understanding is when you do decide to toggle on Google Signals, the way it works is that they're taking that information from users that have a Google account that have also opted in to ads and personalization. So it's only that section of users. So yes, it can give you the age range or the interests or the location, but only for the sector of users that actually have Google accounts, given most people have Google accounts, but still it's not every single user that's on your website.
The only answer I can give back is watch this space. Like, we're still seeing so much changing. It's still within recent memory that Apple's iOS 14 came out and, allowed users to disable what we thought were standard settings. We have many other jurisdictions in North America here that are enabling their own privacy regulations. So if we have data that is helpful for us for now, I think that's good. It's not an automatic that we will have this information in all places for all time. So I wish I could give you a better answer, Jason, but the point is that I find that marketers truly shine when they face these kind of constraints, and then they have to really think about how they're going to market to this audience regardless. So that's kind of the upbeat note that I want to leave us with is this type of extra information is great. And in the past, we've had maybe more information than we should have. But whether we have some of this identifying information or not, we can still do marketing.
Absolutely. Agreed. 100%. We would be no good at what we do if we couldn't figure out and work around here. So there's that. Awesome. Let's move on here. So what events do you need for e-commerce? Again, we touched upon this the last time we spoke. So for us, anyone that's on this webinar that's working with ArcticLeaf, we work with 3 different platforms. That's BigCommerce, Shopify, and Miva. All 3 platforms have since come out with their own native integrations, and they generally have the same type of purchase events that come with those integrations. Maybe I think Miva might have more. BigCommerce, Shopify might have one or another that's different. Generally speaking, the ones that you get are going to be the ones that you're going to want to see if you're any type of stock standard e-commerce store. Not much has changed there, and I haven't heard anything in our ecosystem of much changing there, at least in before the end of this year. So, but keep an eye on it to see if more of those events if more purchase events are added on to those native integrations. I think we can move on from this one. Next slide. Perfect. This one I think is a little bit different. Glenn, I'm going to hand this to you because this is your
Sure.
first.
Yeah, happy to. The fact is that Google Analytics 4 does a better job of knowing what's going on with your website because of this events style architecture. And so it will seem to you that it is just more intelligent with understanding what's going on your website. I certainly feel that compared to the old days of Universal, and you can kind of clue it in even more to what's going on your website by toggling something called enhanced measurement. This is probably going to work for most websites out there on a content management system, anything modern, and it kind of opens up the ability for it to detect forms or to detect videos being watched, even moving across subdomains or even across full domains. These are things that used to take us a very long time to set up under Universal. And now, no coding involved. You just look at what it is showing you when you're running an assistant that is watching your tags, and you see tags fire and you say, that tag right there, let's go ahead and make that a key conversion event. So it will understand, and then you can start tracking what you're getting for it. Mm-hmm. There will still be things like if you have a ROI calculator or some kind of widget inside of a frame, it may not understand that. So you will go ahead and set up a custom conversion event for that. But the rest of them, it's really gotten a lot easier. You don't need a developer.
Mm-hmm. Have you found yourself making a lot of custom events? I should have asked you this a few slides ago, but I'm curious.
Surprisingly, I don't have to. Most websites are just detected by Google Analytics to see the main actions. Yeah, it seems to know what you want to accomplish. Mm-hmm. So that's a bit of a bonus. We've certainly had to do more than our fair share of change recently. So this is one of those, reliefs where we don't have to make so many changes.
Less custom, the better. By awesome. I think we can move on. Next slide. Okay, yeah, reporting across UA and GA4. Glenn, I think you already kind of talked about this a little bit, but again, we're talking when we talked about the container, and we're talking about doing an audit or clean up your container. Also, this is an opportunity to look across your reporting between UA, what you had in UA, and any type of reports that you use there, and what you want to use in GA4, and take the time to really figure out, what reports do you still need, or what reports can you fine tune now? Because most people have used UA for so long that it has become muddled with all types of messy reports and messy kind of data points, and GA4 gives you that kind of clean slate. And along the lines of the container, take this as an opportunity to identify what you actually need with your reports, and what you actually need now in GA4 as opposed to what you were using in UA. What do you think, Glenn?
I'm going to speak right now to the people who are either business owners or principals in their business. Mm-hmm. If you have a junior who has normally put together reports, those time series graphs, line graphs on what's been happening, I'm going to ask you to consider what they would have to do if you insisted on seeing data that's in the time frame of Universal Analytics. So maybe, the early part of 2023, if that's all you had running. And then they will have to somehow stitch that together with the information coming in now from GA4. These are totally different systems. It's not like you just did an upgrade. So please have some sympathy for them. The good news is that at a high level, so things like how many users did we have, you can see two reports side by side from each product, and you will have something similar. But the minute we start to get a little deeper, or as it suggests here, where we're looking at taking out the internal staff because we filtered that IP address out of our UA data, but we don't have the same thing in GA4, it really just becomes a nightmare for someone to stitch those together. So the fork in the road we're at is, do we still need to look at old UA data? I would suggest, outside of looking at seasonality, we probably don't. So I'm going to encourage us to use whatever date we switched on GA4, which at the very latest would have been July 1st of this year, as the farthest date that we're going back. And let's just, as Jason said with his house move, appreciate what is in the new place that you have and try to use that, because that is the system you're going to have to get used to for the long haul.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Acclimate as soon as you can. Again, we mentioned this before in the last two webinars. So awesome. Let's move on. Next slide here. So GA4, work in progress. Of course, it is. I don't know when it's not going to be a work in progress, though. I think during our first webinar, we mentioned that it was in beta, and maybe it was much more in beta. But again, even with UA, they still had their updates during the duration of using UA, and I'm sure GA4 is going to have the same. So maybe it's kind of flipping our perspective of this and being like, it's no longer in beta, but there are going to be updates and there are going to be headaches with that. But with that being said, I found some interesting things. In this slide, it's saying 24-hour lag time for new events and conversions. I've actually seen that up to 72 hours. For some of the reports I've made or some of the custom events, it can take a few days to bring in that data, which can be frustrating, but it is what it is. We have to work around that. Obviously, limited historical data, you touched upon that, Glenn, when it comes to, as the date you adopted GA4 and started using it, that's essentially the date that's the data you have, and that's going to be the date that you have to comp your data. So that is what it is. That's why we're really recommending, get on it as soon as possible, start using it as soon as possible. And additionally, regular front-end updates. I have a funny story. GA4 has updated their dashboard so many times, and usually I catch it within the week or whatnot. I think I might have messaged you at one time, Glenn, on LinkedIn saying, oh, I just noticed this. I was on a call with a client sharing my screen, and I was going, doing their business review, and I was saying, hey, I was talking about Google Signals, and we had the discussion around Google Signals, and I said, and they agreed to do it, and I said, okay, I can easily toggle this on. He's like, can you do it right now? I'm like, of course I can do it right now. It'll take me 25 seconds. I go into the admin, and the whole admin has changed, and I did not know where they nested Google Signals. It took me maybe 15 more seconds to find it, but it was live. I was screen sharing, and I was like, Google, why did you do this right now? So they are doing that. And I've heard from a lot of clients as well that they go on and things have been shifted, things have moved. And that is frustrating. Additionally, I'm finding a lot of my documentation that I find helpful from third parties. And Google, we've always said that Google is not great at documentation. And I wonder if that's because they know that GA4 is still a work in progress, that they don't want to have the documentation out there until it's kind of set in stone. Because of that, I find third parties a lot more valuable when it comes into creating custom reports, creating custom events. A lot of us are in the weeds, so we're figuring these things out in real time. And there are great parties out there that document that. So the recommendation, go out there, look outside of Google's documentation if you have a question or if you're confused about GA4. But yeah, limited historical data though. Glenn, I think you might have a point to talk about that.
The thing is that they are not holding on to data for the length of time that they were in UA. There is, within that admin section that Jason said has been changed, there is something called data retention. So I encourage you to go and look in there. And if you haven't touched it at all, it will say 2 months. Mm-hmm. You can make a change to it where it will hold on to data for 14 months. So I would encourage you to make that change if you're the person who looks after the admin. beyond 14 months, because I know the question is going to be asked, what do you do? Well, what they want you to do is to use other things outside of analytics to hold on to that data. So the two options that usually are used, one is there is for Google Sheets something called the GA4 reports builder for Google Analytics. Only Google could have come up with that name. But it's something they made, and it's a tool that allows you to go and grab older data, hit a button, and then there you go. It's created a spreadsheet for you with all of that beautiful tabular data. The other way that people can do it is building a data warehouse, and there is a connection that Google offers to their own data warehouse, Google BigQuery. And I'd be happy to talk with people later about how to do that. But those are the ways. The takeaway here is Google is now telling you that your data is your responsibility. So they're going to let you see it for a while, but if you treat this data as important, and you should, then you should also be looking after it over its lifetime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Being responsible with the data you have, the data of your users, the data of your customers. Google's like, it's all yours. You decide what you want to do with it. It's no longer ours. And from a business sense, I understand why they are doing that. So awesome. Okay, I think we can move on to the next slide here. The key takeaways. Okay, let me try not to mess the dates up again because the dates are always changing. You will no longer have access to your UA reports after June 30th of 2024. So of course, the sooner you get on GA4, which everyone has, I'm sure. If you have a UA account, Google already created the GA4 account for you. It's a matter of actually actively using it and becoming acclimated to it. And again, GA4, it's an opportunity to prioritize your metrics, clean up your GTM container, and get back to the basics. That's what we were kind of talking about. Use it as a time to clean house, start over, start a clean slate, especially right now. It's coming up at the end of the year, and everybody loves to start fresh, start new. Use that as an incentive. Q1 is for a lot of people, or it's a much slower time. So use that time to kind of clean house and start strong. And instead of replicating old reports, take some time and look at what was useful for you prior in UA and what wasn't useful for you, and take that information and apply that in GA4 in a way that's actually going to be beneficial for you, because business, everything changes, and you want to be malleable with that, and you want to actually be able to use GA4 in the way it's intended to be used. And again, like we just talked about, GA4 is a work in progress. It's frustrating, but again, this tool is very important. It can be very, very useful if you just take the time to actually look into the nuances of it. I do believe that you'll find a lot of value around GA4. And of course, there's people like Glenn that exist out there in Arctic Leaf, and we can help assist with any GA4 related issues. Do you have any final points, Glenn, before we go into the questions?
I think you've said it best, Jason.
Yes, sir. So I think we might have some questions, and hopefully we have answers.
Alrighty, so this is one that was submitted before the webinar today. And it is, what are the key data points to track brand awareness?
Got it. Want me to take that one, Glenn?
Go for it.
For sure. So with GA4, they do have engagement metrics and dimensions. So you want to look at things like new users, engaged sessions per users, views per session. I built out a customer retention report that can really help with that. If you have on-site assets like videos or file downloads or anything like that, you want to measure the performance from those as well. Those will really give you those kind of key components to understand brand awareness. It is a bigger, that's a very broad way to answer it. It's a case by case, and it really comes down to looking at your business, looking at your product and what you're trying to do around your brand identity, and then finding out the best method to go around and use GA4 in that manner. So if whoever's asking this, if you do want to learn more, by all means, reach out to Glenn and I, and we can definitely take a look, and we can definitely look in and give you some key points.
Sure. And I'll just add, Jason, there's a tool that folks probably did use with Universal called Google Search Console. you can connect it to GA4 just like you had it with Google Universal Analytics, and that will bring in some share of voice information. And so you can hopefully use that information to help that brand study as well.
Absolutely.
And then since we've got a little bit of time, I think we can touch on this one as well. How exactly do I export my data from UA?
I will take that one. So simplest way is to go into the interface. So the same way that you got into GA4, if you look up at the top, you will see a drop down. It is going to show you any UA property that you did have. So you're going to go into that. You're going to see those familiar old screens, but there's going to be a whole lot of zeros. You need to pick your date range, and then you're going to have to go get a few downloads. And I would suggest going down the left-hand menu. You're going to start at something like audience. That's their first one. Go down to one of those important types of audience information that your company has looked at. Maybe it's geography, something like that, location, let's say. And you will see down at that deeper level of menu, like a second level down, you will see a screen. You'll get into that screen. You've got a download icon over on the right-hand side. You click it. You figure out if you want it as a sheet or as an Excel. You're then going to rinse, lather, and repeat that process for acquisition, behavior, and conversions. So there's 4 areas you need to go looking through, but once you've gone through and grabbed, I usually end up with about 6, 7 extracts out of those. And then when it comes time to answer a question, you've got that data there. And you should try to set your date range back as far as you can, because this is one of the last times where Google is going to have years of your data that they will give to you without charging you for it.
Great points. Absolutely. Hannah?
We have one last question, but we are kind of coming up on time. Maybe we can do a short preview, and then the rest of it you can catch on our blog. The question is, how can we use GA4 to give correct conversion data as it differs from report to report and with AdWords?
It sounds like their conversion, their data is not matching up with their source of truth, perhaps, which happens all the time. There is a margin of error expected sometimes between your source of truth, if say that's BigCommerce data that your point of sale to Google Analytics. Generally, that margin shouldn't be that great. There are other tools out there that can offer help with cleaning up your data, like server-side tracking type third-party apps, like Little Data, Fuel.io type. But it sounds like there should be some type of audit, because if your conversion is measuring differently between your different dashboards, something could be firing incorrectly or something needs to be cleaned up. Glenn, do you have any other points on that one? We can kind of touch upon that more in the blog, because that's a vast answer.
Yeah, and we should. Yeah, it's a detective game, and I was going in the same direction you were. If it's starting to get wider, we start looking down into, okay, well, are they moving up and down in the same directions at the same time? Is one moving farther than another? One of these ones, and this gets back to that tidying up that container notion, is one of them double counting, right? So is one of the conversion numbers always twice what you think the right number is? Okay, you probably have 2 tags firing where you need 1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point. We are at time. Glenn, I really do hope that we get to chat again sometime next year. And I'm going to just put it out there and I'm going to say that we will. Something will happen in the GA4 sphere where something's going to change, or something. I hope it does, so we get to chat again. But nothing crazy where it's fun, but just I always enjoy these, because GA4 is, it can be intimidating for a lot, but I think with your knowledge, Glenn, it really helps people understand it more clear. So I appreciate.
Yeah, no, thank you. And you know, as well. Arctic Leaf is always keeping up on these things, and you shouted out to the community of other analytics pros out there that are helping to keep us all up to date on what Google keeps doing with this. I do understand that there's one person who's on this webinar who's going to get to talk to you, I, or possibly both of us with a consultation.
I believe Hannah.
That's correct. So we're offering up a free GA4 consultation for the two of you. And that is going to be done through a survey. After this webinar ends, we'll be sending out a survey for everybody who joined. And from there, we'll be picking out of a hat who wins, and we'll be emailing you the rest of the details.
Perfect. That's amazing. Awesome. Hannah, is that it? Is that the end of the show?
Yep, that's everything. Thank you both for being part of this 3-part series. I kind of hope there's more, kind of hope there isn't. A little bit of both.
Thank you for putting it on, Hannah, and thank you to all of the folks who took part in this today. I really had fun, Jason. How about you?
I did. I always have fun chatting with you. I always learn something chatting with you, so I do appreciate your time. I say that all the time, but I do. You're the smartest one every time. Well, have a good rest of your week. Anybody else, reach out to us if you have any questions. Thank you so much for joining today. And that's it.